The departure board flickered above me as I lay bleeding on the cold terminal floor, my vision blurring between the harsh fluorescent lights and the pool of crimson spreading beneath me. Gate 47. That's where they'd left me to die, after stealing everything, my ticket, my passport, my entire identity. Isabelle's designer heels clicked past my head one final time, and I could see her lips moving through my fading consciousness. You should have known better than to trust family, Clara. But thank you for the inheritance, and for making it so easy. My stepsister, the one I'd protected from our father's rage, the one I'd shared my mother's fortune with out of love. She'd orchestrated it all, the fake business trip, the terminal accident, even bribing airport security to look the other way as they dragged me into the maintenance corridor and left me to bleed out. Behind her, my fiancé James adjusted his tie with those hands I'd once loved, now stained with my blood. The merger documents are signed in her name. By the time they find the body, we'll be in Switzerland with everything transferred. He stepped over me like I was garbage, pulling Isabelle close. Your dear sister really was too trusting. My stepmother Victoria stood by the gate, her cold eyes watching me die with satisfaction. 23 years I had to pretend to care about you, Clara. 23 years of playing the loving stepmother while you held what should have been Isabelle's. Your mother's company, her fortune, even the Hampton estate. But blood always tells, doesn't it? Real family protects their own. The irony burned worse than the knife wound in my stomach. Real family. I'd given them everything, trusted them with my mother's legacy, brought them into the business, shared every success. And this was my reward, dying alone in a maintenance corridor while they boarded my private jet with my life's work. The sedative in her coffee should keep her from making noise, Victoria added clinically. Security shift changes in 10 minutes. By then. She didn't need to finish. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my throat only produced a wet gurgle. The paralytic they'd given me was wearing off, but too late. Far too late. I could only watch as they walked away. Isabelle carrying my Hermes bag, James wearing my father's watch, Victoria holding the documents that would transfer everything I'd built. The last thing I saw was a janitor's bucket being kicked over, dirty water mixing with my blood as my vision went black. My last thought was a desperate prayer to anyone who might be listening. Please, let me have another chance. Let me show them what real betrayal feels like. Then nothing until, Clara, wake up. We're going to miss the flight. My eyes snapped open. Isabelle's face hovered inches from mine. But instead of designer makeup and cruel satisfaction, she wore the fake concern I remembered from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when she'd first suggested the family business trip that would bring us all closer together. I was in my penthouse bedroom, morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. My phone showed the date, March 15th, 2021. 3 years before my death. The day Isabelle had first planted the seeds of my destruction. Clara, are you okay? Isabelle's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. You look pale. Maybe you should stay home. I can handle the Singapore merger meetings myself. No. My voice came out stronger than expected. I sat up, every memory of my death crystal clear, every betrayal etched into my consciousness. I'm perfectly fine. Isabelle's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something like frustration before returning to its practiced innocence. Are you sure? You've been working so hard lately. James and I were just telling Mother how concerned we are. James, my fiancé who would help murder me. I could hear his voice from the living room, laughing with Victoria about something, the same laugh I'd heard as I bled out. Actually, I said, standing and moving to my closet with purpose, I have been thinking about the Singapore trip. I've decided to handle it personally. Alone. Alone? Isabelle's voice pitched higher. But we're family. This was supposed to be our bonding experience. Mother has been looking forward to it for months, and James cleared his entire schedule. I pulled out a different outfit than the one I'd worn in my previous life. Black Chanel suit instead of the vulnerable white dress they'd suggested. Family, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. Yes, you keep reminding me of that. Strange, considering you only became interested in family bonding after Forbes published that article about my net worth. Clara! Isabelle's eyes widened with practiced hurt. How could you say such a thing? We love you. Love. They'd said they loved me as they watched me die. I'm sure you do, I replied smoothly, selecting my jewellery. Not the family heirlooms they'd suggested I wear, but modern pieces with hidden GPS trackers. Details from my previous life flooded back. How they'd disabled my phone, removed my jewellery, made me untraceable. Not this time. Victoria appeared in my doorway, her signature disapproving frown in place. Clara, Isabelle tells me you're having second thoughts about our family trip. After all the planning we've done. I met her cold eyes directly, something I'd rarely done in my first life. I'm having second thoughts about many things, Victoria. Tell me, when exactly did you and Isabelle become so interested in my business dealings? If I recall correctly, you called my mother's company New Money Vulgarity at her funeral. A flush crept up Victoria's neck. People change, Clara. We're trying to be supportive. Supportive, I interrupted, moving past them toward my home office. Is that what you call it? Because I call it suspicious that Isabelle suddenly developed an interest in international finance, right after discovering she wasn't in my will. Behind me, I heard Isabelle's sharp intake of breath. In my previous life, I'd already added her to my will by this point, trusting their manipulation. This time, I'd changed nothing. James appeared in the hallway, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern, the same face that had smiled while pushing the knife deeper into my stomach. Babe, what's going on? Isabelle said you're acting strange. I looked at him, really looked at him. How had I missed the calculating coldness in his eyes? The way he always touched my expensive things with barely concealed greed, the way his affection increased proportionally to my bank balance. Strange, I laughed, the sound sharp enough to make him step back. Is it strange to question why my fiancé has been having lunch meetings with my stepsister behind my back? Or why those meetings always happen to be at hotels? The silence was deafening. In my previous life, I'd never confronted them, never questioned the obvious signs. I'd been so desperate for family, for love, that I'd blinded myself to their true nature. Those were business meetings, James stammered, about the surprise we were planning. The surprise, I said flatly. Yes, I am sure it would have been very surprising. Tell me, James, does this surprise involve the Cayman Islands account you opened last month? The one you thought I didn't know about? His face went white. In my previous life, I discovered that account only after my rebirth, when I'd pieced together their financial manipulation. They'd been planning my demise for over 2 years, slowly positioning themselves to take everything. How did you... He caught himself, but too late. How did I know? I smiled, the expression cold enough to frost windows. I know everything, James. Every secret meeting, every hidden document, every whispered conversation you thought I was too trusting to notice. Victoria stepped forward, her composure cracking. Clara, you're being paranoid. This is obviously stress from overwork. Perhaps you should see someone. A therapist, I suggested. How convenient. Have you already selected one? Someone who might diagnose me as unstable? Someone who might suggest I need a conservatorship for my own good? The way Victoria's mouth opened and closed told me everything. In my previous life, that had been their backup plan. If the terminal murder had failed, they would have had me declared mentally incompetent. Get out, I said quietly. All of you, get out of my home. You can't just, Isabelle started. I can and I will. Security is already on their way up. I triggered the silent alarm the moment I'd woken up, another precaution I'd never taken before. You have 5 minutes to leave before I have you escorted out. This is insane. James stepped toward me, his mask finally slipping to reveal the rage beneath. After everything we've done for you. Done for me, I laughed, backing toward my office where I kept a panic button. You mean after everything you've done to me? Or should I say, everything you were planning to do? The elevator chimed and 3 security guards entered, employees of the building I'd never thought to befriend in my first life. Now I knew better. Escort these 3 out, I instructed. They're no longer welcome in the building. Ever. As security moved forward, Isabelle made one last desperate attempt. Clara, please, we're family. You can't just throw us away. I looked at her, this stepsister who would have watched me die, who would have stolen my life and felt no remorse. Family doesn't plan murder, Isabelle. Family doesn't steal inheritances or seduce fiancés or plot elaborate schemes to destroy each other. Murder? Victoria's voice rose in pitch. Clara, you're talking nonsense. Am I? I pulled out my phone, showing them the recording app that had been running since I woke up. Everything you've said this morning has been recorded. Every admission, every slip. Would you like to continue this conversation at the police station? The 3 of them exchanged panicked glances. They hadn't expected this. In my previous life, I'd been weak, desperate for approval, easy to manipulate. But death had taught me valuable lessons about trust and family. As security escorted them toward the elevator, James turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Clara. You can't survive in this world alone. Watch me, I replied, steel in my voice. The elevator doors closed on their shocked faces, and I stood alone in my penthouse, surrounded by the wealth and success they'd tried to steal. But this was just the beginning. They'd planned to destroy me slowly, methodically, over 3 years. I had 3 years of knowledge about their plans, their weaknesses, their secrets. 3 years to turn their own weapons against them. Walking to my window, I looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there, they were regrouping, planning their next move. They thought this was a setback. They had no idea this was the beginning of their end. My phone buzzed, my real estate agent confirming the viewing for a new property. In my previous life, I'd learned that Victoria had been embezzling from her charity foundation. Isabelle had a drug problem she'd hidden behind her perfect facade. James had debts to people who didn't accept IOUs. I smiled. A real smile for the first time since my rebirth. They'd taught me valuable lessons about betrayal. Now it was time to return the education. 3 weeks had passed since I'd thrown them out. 3 weeks of blissful silence while I'd restructured everything. My will, my company's leadership, my entire life. But I knew they wouldn't stay away for long. Predators never abandon easy prey without a fight. The knock came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing acquisition documents for a small airline company, something that, in my previous life, I'd never have considered. But I needed my own wings for what was coming. Miss Clara, there's a Mr. Bradley Whitman here to see you, my assistant Diana announced through the intercom. He says it's regarding a family matter. Bradley Whitman, Victoria's brother and a partner at Whitman and Associates law firm. In my previous life, he'd been the one to handle the fraudulent documents after my death. Now, he was here 3 years early, which meant they were accelerating their timeline. Send him in, I said, activating the recording device hidden in my desk lamp. Bradley entered with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case he'd rigged. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of distinguished appearance that made judges trust him implicitly. He'd helped Victoria hide her first husband's death, making it look like suicide when she'd slowly poisoned him for his insurance money. I'd learned that delightful fact only after my rebirth, when I'd hired a private investigator to dig into everyone who'd betrayed me. "Clara," he said warmly, as if we were old friends. "You look well. Better than what Victoria described, actually." "Disappointed?" I asked, not offering him a seat. He sat anyway, uninvited. "Concerned. Victoria tells me you've been making some unusual accusations, talking about murders that haven't happened, schemes that don't exist. The family is worried about your mental state." There it was, the backup plan, arriving ahead of schedule. "The family," I repeated. "Interesting how Victoria's concern only manifests when money is involved. Tell me, Bradley, how much is she paying you for this house call?" His smile tightened. "I'm here as a friend of the family." "You're here as a co-conspirator in attempted fraud," I interrupted, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for this exact moment. "Would you like to see the evidence I've collected about the Riverside Charity Foundation? The one Victoria runs? The one you help her embezzle from?" His face didn't change, but his pupils dilated. A tell I'd learned to recognise. "That's a serious accusation, Clara. Defamation is... It's not defamation if it's true." I spread the documents across my desk. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, charity donations that mysteriously decreased by 40% between donation and distribution, and, my favourite, death certificates for 3 major donors who conveniently passed away right after changing their wills to benefit the foundation. Bradley stood abruptly. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter? The FBI will be very interested in them. Unless, of course, you'd like to reconsider this little visit." He stared at the papers and I could see him calculating, weighing his options. "What do you want?" "I want you to deliver a message to Victoria. Tell her that if she, Isabelle, or James come near me again, these documents go to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. Tell her I know about Harold's death. Tell her I know about the insulin in his whiskey." Bradley's face went grey. Harold was Victoria's first husband, Isabelle's father. The official cause of death was diabetic coma from alcohol consumption. The truth was much darker. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice cracked. "Test me," I challenged. "But before you do, you should know that I've also discovered interesting information about your own activities. The Pemberton case, for instance. The witness who mysteriously disappeared? I found him. He's very much alive and very willing to talk for the right price." Bradley backed toward the door, his composure shattered. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Clara. Victoria has connections." "So do I said calmly. "The difference is, mine are legal. Goodbye, Bradley. Don't come back." After he left, I sat back and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. In my previous life, I'd been reactive, always playing defence. This time, I was 10 steps ahead. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake." I smiled and typed back, "No, Isabelle. You made the mistake 3 years ago when you decided to kill me. P.S. Your dealer, Tommy? He works for me now." The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before the message came through. "How do you know about Tommy?" Because in my previous life, after my death, Isabelle's drug problem had spiraled out of control. She'd overdosed 6 months after stealing my fortune, her body found in a penthouse bought with my money. Even in victory, she'd destroyed herself. But I hadn't known about Tommy until after my rebirth, when I'd traced back her connections. I didn't respond. Let her paranoia eat at her the way mine had when I'd first sensed their betrayal, but couldn't prove it. My computer chimed with an encrypted email from my private investigator, Rodriguez. The subject line read, "James Castellano, full report." I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. James, my supposedly successful investment banker fiancé, was drowning in gambling debts to the Marchetti crime family. $2 million due in 6 months. In my previous life, my death had conveniently solved that problem for him. But the best part was the photos Rodriguez had included. James at underground poker games, James meeting with Marchetti enforcers, and the crown jewel James with Isabelle at a hotel dated 2 years ago. They'd been sleeping together for longer than I'd thought. I forwarded the photos to a contact at the SEC, along with evidence of James's insider trading. Then, I made a call to someone I'd never have contacted in my previous life. "Mr. Marchetti, this is Clara Winters. I understand James Castellano owes you money." "Yes, $2 million. I have a proposition for you." The conversation was brief but productive. I offered to pay James's debt in exchange for certain considerations, namely, that James would receive some very specific messages about the consequences of crossing me. Nothing violent, of course, just educational. By evening, the pieces were falling into place beautifully. Victoria's charity was under preliminary investigation. Isabelle was spiralling into paranoia about her drug connections. James would soon discover that his debts had been purchased by someone who had very specific payment terms that didn't involve money. I stood at my window, watching the sunset paint the city gold. In my previous life, this view had been stolen from me, enjoyed by my murderers as they celebrated my death. Not this time. My phone rang. Diana's voice was urgent. "Miss Clara, there's been an incident. Mr. Castellano is in the hospital. Apparently, he fell down some stairs at his office building." "How unfortunate," I said evenly. "Send flowers from the company, something appropriate. Perhaps white lilies." White lilies, funeral flowers. The same ones they'd sent to my memorial service in my previous life, not knowing I'd already been reborn. "Also, Miss Clara, the acquisition papers for Skyline Airways are ready for your signature. And there's someone here to see you, a Mr. Ethan Cross. He says he's from the FBI Financial Crimes Division." Ethan Cross. In my previous life, he'd investigated my death 3 years too late, finding only cold trails and paid-off witnesses. This time, I'd invited him myself. "Send him up," I said. It was time to plant the seeds that would bloom into their destruction. They thought they'd had 3 years to plan my demise. They didn't realise I had 3 years of their future failures to weaponise against them. The war had begun, and this time I held all the cards. Ethan Cross wasn't what I'd expected. In my previous life, I'd only seen photos of him from the investigation files, 3 years older, worn down by cold cases and department politics. This Ethan was younger, hungrier, with sharp green eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed my office. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent, "thank you for reaching out. Your information about the Riverside Charity Foundation is compelling." "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing to the espresso machine. "I promise it's not poisoned." His lips twitched. Interesting choice of words. Most people would say, "I just made a fresh pot." "Most people haven't been murdered by their family," I said, then caught myself. Too much truth, too soon. Ethan's eyes sharpened. "Excuse me?" "A figure of speech," I covered smoothly. "My stepfamily has been rather aggressive in their attempts to access my inheritance. One might say murderously so." He pulled out a notepad, and I recognised the gesture from my previous life's investigation files. Ethan Cross had an eidetic memory, but liked to write things down to make suspects nervous. "Tell me about these attempts," he said. I handed him a carefully curated file, enough to start an investigation, not enough to reveal my impossible knowledge. Financial fraud, attempted identity theft, and what I believe are preliminary steps towards something more permanent. You'll find documented evidence of my stepmother's previous husband's suspicious death, my stepsister's connections to drug trafficking, and my ex-fiancé's insider trading. Ethan whistled low. "Ex-fiancé? Recent development?" 3 weeks ago, right after I discovered he'd been sleeping with my stepsister for 2 years. And now he's in the hospital with a broken leg, Ethan noted. Convenient. Karma has excellent timing, I said. Though I understand he fell because he was running from some gentleman discussing his gambling debts. Nothing to do with me. Ethan studied me for a long moment. Miss Winters, are you in danger? The question hung between us. In my previous life, no one had asked until it was too late. Not anymore, I said. I've taken precautions. But at Agent Cross, they will try to kill me. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. When they realise their other plans have failed, they'll resort to violence. That's a serious accusation. It's a prediction based on pattern recognition, I corrected. Victoria killed Harold when he threatened divorce. She'll follow the same pattern with me when she realises I can't be manipulated or institutionalised. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think you're safe in your tower, but even towers fall. I showed it to Ethan. That would be Isabelle. She's getting desperate. How do you know it's her? Because she always uses unnecessarily poetic threats when she's high. Check your department's drug trafficking division for recent activity involving someone named Tommy Martinez. I believe you'll find some interesting connections. Ethan made another note. You've thought this through. I've had time to plan, I said carefully. Agent Cross, what would you need to build a RICO case against them? His pen stilled. RICO? That's organised crime territory. What would you call a family conspiracy involving murder, fraud, embezzlement, drug trafficking, and money laundering? A federal case that would make my career, he admitted. But I'd need more than suspicious circumstances. I'd need them to actively commit crimes that we can document. I smiled. What if I told you they're planning to rob the Riverside Charity Foundation's annual gala next week? $5 million in cash donations that Victoria keeps in a secure location before depositing, except 30% never makes it to the bank. You have proof of this? I have Victoria's own voice on recording discussing it with Bradley Whitman. But, Agent Cross, I need something in return. This isn't a negotiation. Yes, it is, I interrupted. I want federal protection when this goes down, and I want you personally assigned to the case. No passing it off to other departments, no bureaucratic shuffling. You see this through to the end. He leaned back, assessing me. You're not just a victim, are you? You're playing a game here. I'm surviving, I corrected. In 3 years, they plan to leave me bleeding out in an airport terminal. I'm simply accelerating their timeline and changing the ending. 3 years is oddly specific. I shrugged. I've seen their planning documents. Bradley Whitman is very thorough in his criminal conspiracies. My desk phone rang. Diana's voice was tense. Miss Clara, there's a situation in the lobby. Miss Isabelle is here and she's not well. Security is holding her, but she's screaming about needing to see you. She says it's life or death. I activated the security monitor on my computer. Isabelle was in the lobby, hair dishevelled, makeup smeared, clearly in withdrawal. In my previous life, she'd hidden her addiction perfectly until after my death. Now, with Tommy cut off and her regular supplies disrupted, she was unravelling ahead of schedule. Agent Cross, I said, would you like to observe what desperation looks like? We took my private elevator to a security office overlooking the lobby. Through the one-way glass, we could see Isabelle being restrained by 2 guards while she ranted. She knows, Isabelle screamed. She knows everything. We have to stop her before she tells them about the terminal. About Gate 47. Ethan shot me a look. Gate 47? I own a private hangar there, I said carefully. In my previous research into their plans, I discovered they intended to stage an accident there, make it look like I fell from my jet stairs. It was close enough to the truth. They had planned to use my jet just 3 years later and with more violence. Clara. Isabelle spotted the security camera. I know you're watching. You won't win. Mother has friends, powerful friends. They'll make you disappear just like Harold, just like that investigator who got too close. What investigator? Ethan asked sharply. News to me, I lied. In my previous life, a private investigator named David Park had gotten too close to Harold's murder truth 6 months before my death. He'd vanished without a trace. I'd already located him, alive but terrified, hiding in Costa Rica. Should I have her arrested? Ethan asked, pulling out his phone. Not yet, I said. Let her spiral. Desperate people make mistakes. Through the glass, we watched Isabelle collapse, sobbing. 3 years, she wept. We planned for 3 years and she ruined it in 3 weeks. How does she know? How does she know about the insulin, about the terminal, about James and me? Ethan was recording everything on his phone. Miss Winters, I think we need to have a longer conversation about what exactly you know and how you know it. Before I could respond, another commotion erupted in the lobby. James, on crutches with his leg in a cast, burst through the doors. Isabelle, shut up, he roared. Shut your mouth right now. But Isabelle was beyond reason. She paid off the Marchettis. Your debts are gone, but now you belong to her. She owns you. I said, shut up. James lunged forward, raising a crutch like a weapon. Security intervened, but not before Ethan had captured everything. Assault with a weapon, he murmured. That's immediate grounds for arrest. Wait, I said, watching Victoria stride through the doors with Bradley at her side. Victoria took in the scene. Isabelle collapsed and ranting, James being restrained. Security everywhere. And her face went pale. But she recovered quickly, turning to Bradley. Call Judge Morrison, she ordered. We're filing for an emergency psychiatric hold on Clara Winters. She's clearly orchestrated this chaos. Actually, Ethan said, stepping into the lobby with his badge raised, FBI, I'll need all of you to come with me for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and murder. The look on Victoria's face was worth dying for. Had been worth dying for. This is entrapment, Bradley blustered. You have no evidence. Your client just confessed to planning a murder at Gate 47, Ethan said calmly. Multiple witnesses heard it, and that's just the beginning. As FBI agents flooded the lobby, Ethan had called for backup while we watched. I felt a strange sense of completion. In my previous life, I died alone and betrayed. Now, my killers were being arrested while I stood safe in my tower. But this wasn't over. This was just the opening gambit. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse, watching them file in wearing orange jumpsuits. The trial had been a sensation. Billionaire heiress exposes family murder plot had dominated headlines for weeks. But today was sentencing day, and I had one more card to play. Victoria maintained her icy composure, but I could see the cracks. Prison had not been kind to a woman who'd spent 50 years manipulating others to do her dirty work. Isabelle looked hollow, her addiction treatment in federal custody stripping away every facade. James wouldn't meet my eyes. The Marchetti family had sold his debt back to me for $1, making him legally my property in ways that prison couldn't protect him from. Judge Harrison, a severe woman who'd seen through Victoria's attempts at manipulation, reviewed the final documents. Before sentencing, I understand the victim has something to present? I stood smoothing my custom Armani suit, the same designer Victoria had always claimed I didn't have the breeding to wear properly. Your Honour, I've recently come into possession of new evidence. Bradley, serving as Victoria's lawyer despite his own pending charges, shot to his feet. Objection. Discovery is closed. This isn't for the prosecution, I said calmly. It's for the defence. The courtroom went silent. Even Ethan, sitting in the prosecution section, looked confused. Your Honour, I continued, I've discovered that Harold Winters left a video will, one that was hidden by his widow, Victoria. Victoria's face went white. That's impossible. Harold suspected you were poisoning him, I interrupted, producing a tablet. So, he made contingencies. He left everything to Isabelle, his biological daughter, not to Victoria, not to the charity, to Isabelle alone, on one condition. I played the video. Harold's face, gaunt from Victoria's slow poisoning, filled the screen. If you're watching this, Harold said, his voice weak but clear, then Victoria has finally succeeded in killing me. Isabelle, my daughter, I leave you everything. $40 million. The properties, all of it. But only if you never allow Victoria to touch a cent. The moment you give her access, it all goes to charity. Real charity, not Victoria's fraud foundation. The courtroom erupted. Isabelle stared at the screen, then at Victoria, comprehension dawning. You knew, Isabelle whispered. You knew I was supposed to inherit everything. That's why you pushed me to destroy Clara, so I'd be too desperate to question why we needed her money when father had millions. Your Honour, I said, raising my voice above the chaos. I moved to present one more piece of evidence. David Park, the missing investigator. The doors opened and David walked in, alive, terrified, but ready to testify. He'd been hiding in Costa Rica until I'd guaranteed his safety and a new identity. Mr. Park discovered the will 3 years ago, I explained. Victoria and Bradley had him threatened into disappearing, but he kept copies of everything. David took the witness stand, hands shaking. Victoria Winters hired me to investigate her stepdaughter, Clara, but I found the will instead. When I tried to report it, Bradley Whitman had men show up at my daughter's school. They said she'd disappear if I didn't run. You lying bastard, Victoria finally cracked, her composure shattering. We should have killed you like we killed... She stopped, but too late. Like you killed who, Mrs. Winters? Judge Harrison asked coldly. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind her, Bradley had his head in his hands. Your Honour, I said, I have one final recording from my phone the night I threw them out of my penthouse. I played it, Victoria's voice filling the courtroom. 23 years I had to pretend to care about you, Clara. 23 years of playing the loving stepmother while you held what should have been Isabelle's. But I'd edited it, adding the part she'd said in my previous life. Words she'd spoken while I was dying. We should have poisoned you slowly, like Harold. Quick deaths are a mercy you didn't deserve. It wasn't technically real evidence. Those words were from a timeline that no longer existed. But Victoria couldn't deny it without admitting to the attempted murder plot. That's doctored, Victoria screamed. She's lying. Clara's always been jealous of our family. Jealous? I laughed. Of what? The woman who murdered her husband for money she couldn't even inherit. The daughter so desperate for maternal love she'd help kill her stepsister. The man so pathetic he'd murder his fiancée to pay gambling debts. I turned to Judge Harrison. Your Honour, I have a proposal. I'll drop all civil suits against Isabelle. Let her inherit Harold's fortune, if she testifies fully against Victoria and Bradley about everything, including their plans for my murder. Isabelle's eyes darted between Victoria and me. In my previous life, she'd chosen her mother, chosen greed. But that was when she thought Victoria had money to give her. I'll testify, Isabelle said quietly. Mother planned everything. The terminal plot, the fake business trip, even which sedative to use. She said Clara was too trusting, too desperate for family to see it coming. You ungrateful little... Victoria lunged for her daughter, but the bailiffs restrained her. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Victoria Winters, I sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Bradley Whitman, 25 years for accessory to murder and fraud. James Castellano, 15 years for attempted murder and insider trading. She turned to Isabelle. Miss Winters, given your cooperation and your age when these crimes began, I sentence you to 10 years probation and mandatory rehabilitation. Your inheritance from Harold Winters will be placed in trust, accessible only for living expenses and upon completion of your probation. As they led Victoria away, she turned to me one last time. How did you know? How did you know everything? I smiled coldly. Because I've already lived through your betrayal once. This time, I chose a different ending. She'd never understand what I meant. None of them would. Outside the courthouse, Ethan found me. That recording of Victoria confessing to wanting to poison you slowly? That wasn't from the night you threw them out, was it? Does it matter? I asked. She's guilty. No, it doesn't matter legally. But, Clara, how did you really know? The detail about Gate 47, the exact sedative they'd use, the timeline. It's like you'd lived through it before. I looked at him, this man who'd tried so hard to solve my murder in the previous timeline. Would you believe me if I said I had? No, he said honestly, but I'd believe you had a guardian angel with incredible intelligence connections. If only he knew my guardian angel was my own death and rebirth. A limousine pulled up, not the one from my old life, but something better. A Rolls-Royce Phantom with a custom paint job that shifted from black to gold in the sunlight. My new acquisition, Skyline Airways, had been rebranded as Phoenix Airlines. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but I'd earned the right to be obvious about my resurrection. Miss Winters, my new pilot called out, your jet is ready at Terminal 1, Gate 1, not Gate 47. I'd bought the entire airport terminal where I'd died in my previous life and rebuilt it. Gate 47 no longer existed. In its place was a memorial garden for victims of family violence. As we drove to the airport, I thought about the letter I'd received that morning. It was from a woman in Tokyo whose sister had tried to steal her identity and inheritance. She'd heard about my story and wanted advice. I'd already decided to start a foundation, a real one, not like Victoria's fraud. It would help victims of family betrayal, those whose trust had been weaponized against them. The jet was magnificent, a custom Boeing 787 Dreamliner with my initials etched in gold on the tail. As I climbed the same stairs James had planned to push me down, I felt no fear, only triumph. Inside, my new board of directors waited. I'd rebuilt my company with people who'd proven their loyalty through investigation, not blind trust. Diana, my assistant, now Chief Operations Officer. Rodriguez, my investigator, Head of Security. Even Ethan had retired from the FBI to join my legal team. Where to, Miss Winters? The pilot asked. Everywhere, I said, settling into my custom seat. We have an empire to build. As we took off, I saw them through the window. 3 prison transport vehicles carrying my would-be killers to their separate facilities. They'd planned to leave me dead at a terminal. Instead, they were the ones whose journeys had ended. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart stopped, but then I read it. Clara, this is Isabelle. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't deserve it. But thank you for giving me the chance to choose differently. I'll try to be better. Maybe she would. Maybe redemption was possible for some. But not for Victoria. Not for those who could watch someone they claimed to love die and feel nothing but satisfaction. As the jet climbed higher, I closed my eyes and let myself remember that final moment from my first life. The cold terminal floor, the taste of blood, the despair of betrayal. Then I opened them and looked forward. I'd been given something impossible, a second chance, and I'd used it not just for revenge, but for justice. They'd abandoned me at the terminal. Now I was flying past them in my private jet, heading toward a future they'd tried to steal. The only question left was, what would I do with this life they'd tried to take? The answer was simple: everything.